Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. It's my sincere pleasure to introduce Professor Anju Kanazawa. Already during my PhD, actually, when I did my PhD, I came across lots of papers from Anju, and they were always the coolest papers. So I'm really excited for the talk today. Anju did her PhD at the University of Maryland, but also did a brief stint at the Max Planck Institute in Tübingen. Then she did her postdoc with Jitendra and Alyosha and Trevor at Berkeley. And she has gotten all the prizes, like the Palme Young Researcher Award, like a Sloan Fellow. Like she is well decorated on the prize side. And then, Anju's doing today some of the coolest work on 3D reconstruction, 4D reconstruction in computer vision today. So I'm really, really excited and looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vincent. Thank you for such a nice introduction. Okay. Thank you for inviting me today, and I'm really excited to talk about the recent work that we've been working on. Okay, so much of my work is in 3D and 4D understanding from images and video. But why am I doing this? Why am I interested in this problem? And I'm interested in the problem at the end of the day because we get to see so much from so little. From just a little bit of images. From a single image, you get to see the static 3D environment, the moving subjects, and not only that, but from where you are taking the picture. Okay? And really the goal of the intellectual curiosity exercise is to develop a learning system that can similarly recover a rich structured understanding from observations. So this is the reason why I'm excited about this problem. And it's not just the physics that you get from the images. From looking at the way people walk, you already understand what they think about their dog. The way the drivers drive, you get all of these information. So this is very rich. So this is why it's really nice to work on this problem. But then I've been doing this for almost a decade, basically a decade, and I find myself and the community kind of converging into these two categories of solutions in broad strikes. Okay? So the first one is feed-forward models. Okay, you take an image, you have a neural network that outputs something. It might be conditioned on other things. And the other camp is optimization. You're going to set up some objective and solve for that variable. And in my kind of problems where you're trying to explain images, often this takes the form of reconstructing that image through some function, forward function, like reconstruction, analysis by synthesis, or neurorendering, with some priors. So for example, in the optimization camp, we have methods like neuroradiance fields, which have this explicit 3D representation that you optimize from images. On the other hand, you have PixelNerf, which can directly predict this type of representation from images. And it's really a love and hate relationship between these modes of solving the problem. So there are many pros and cons, but the real reason why I like the optimization is because it is flexible, in that I have some hypothesis about the world. And as I get more images or more observations, you get to update that hypothesis. That feels very human, like Bayesian. It's also interpretable. So this is the real reason why I like the optimization, is flexibility. And it's more accurate because of that, too. But on the other hand, this is not scalable. And it's not easy to incorporate the prior in the optimization process. You can use off-the-shelf observations with priors, but the optimization itself feels clunky. You have to set up the objective. There's the hyperparameters, all of these things. So on the other hand, feed-forward has this really nice property that it's super scalable. It has this data magic. But then it's so inflexible, because often you run a model, like SAM or any of our approaches, and vision people are like, oh, this works. And then you run it, and it doesn't. Or it's wrong somehow. And then you're like, you can't make it change it. You just get one thing, and that's it. And it's really dependent on the training data. And so this feels really frustrating, too. So I really find myself throughout my career just zigzagging between team feed-forward and team optimization. So who here is team optimization? Okay, team optimization. Okay, team feed-forward. Okay. So it's really that, So you start with some work, and you do some feed-forward versions of this. You do some pixel nerf, and then you go back to Planoxels because you want to actually explicitly solve it. You do some feed-forward stuff, more stuff, but lately I've been like team optimization again. And then, so I'm like, this is like going back and forth, and what is the right way of doing this? And then something happened last year. I had a baby. And this really challenged the way I think about the way of solving these problems. And it's been really inspirational. And it's interesting because she was neither feed-forward or optimization, but then both at the same time. Okay, because she is a feed-forward model, of course, a scalable learner, but she can incorporate new observations as it comes in context. Right? So she is doing this kind of optimization or reasoning, thinking type of things. And so I'm like, this is kind of interesting. I see aspects of my way of doing this because I say I want to do human perception, but then I see this kind of neither and both at the same time. And so I'm like, what's really special about the baby? I mean, there's so many things special about the baby. But then I did notice one key difference. And that key functional difference actually, was that she runs online. She just interprets the world as it comes, one moment at a time. Okay, and this actually, in robotics community, I'm sure this hits a nerve. I mean, obviously, you cannot wait for your robot to process your data to do stuff. But then often, I think people tend to think of online as, it's just like engineering. At test time, you want to run it online. It's about making it real time. But actually, I think there's something deep here. There is a big implication of actually being online. Because if you're online, you don't get to see everything at once, because you are incrementally seeing the new world. This means you actually have to continuously update your internal beliefs or hypothesis state about the world as the observation comes. And every new observation is in light of the things you already have seen. And conceptually, it's very simple. It's, all the models nowadays are transformers. But it's actually a matter of how to use a transformer. And there's actually a big difference between batch static processing, because if it's static batch, you're never really updating your hypothesis. You're always starting from scratch. So this really was the inspiration. And of course, this comes very natural in robotics. Like SLAM, or Kelvin filter, Kelvin smoother, all of these are classic ideas. And I think it's because you were thinking right, because you are existing in the moment, you really want to do the action perception loop. But it was difficult to incorporate the learning, so I kind of feel like we were diverging. And of course, these ideas aren't new, right? Recurrent neural networks and all of these things are happening. But I guess this is this was really the inspiration. And so this is the first work that I'm going to talk about that really scratches the surface of this direction that we worked on after my baby with this wonderful team. Chen Chen and Yifei were the first authors that really took it, and we, in collaboration with Alex and Alyosha, and we talked a lot about how we should solve these things. And okay, so let's start with an example. So what do you think this is? What is this picture of? It's a chair. I think it looks like a chair that you could sit on. But let me play the video. Now, it's an image. You know that it's an image. Okay, and then this video is going to go back to the front image later. It's going to come back around. And then now you see it. So it's like this, a long video. So in the beginning, you started out with like, oh, it's a 3D chair. It's a normal chair. But then the moment it moves, it's like a painting. And in the end, it comes back to this particular view that you started in the beginning. And now you know it's a painting. And this is the process that really is exciting. Feels like you're doing the optimization in the process. So Qt is a feed-forward neural network. So in the beginning, the reconstructed scene is like this. It's 3D. Okay, but as it sees this middle image, it outputs properly the flat things. And when this goes back to the view that we started out with, it actually learns that it's still flat. And so it has updated that its beliefs. It's actually still flat. So, so it was able to update what I think about this underlying scene. So that's kind of like the demonstration of what I'm really talking about. And so the goal of this work was to develop a scalable online feed-forward model that continuously updates its estimates based on new observations. And the proposal was really run Duster-like transformer, which is a new way of doing this data-driven 3D prediction recurrently with a persistent state. And so let me describe what I mean. Is that you see a new image, and you're going to have this current understanding of the 3D world. This is based on we're going to represent this as a latent 3D state. It's just a set of tokens. And of course, this is informed by your past visual experience. This is why you can do it from just a single image. But then as new image comes in, it's going to look at this and update its state representation, and then update the right thing. So with this insight, the method is really simple. We just keep around a set of tokens, which is the state. You can get an image, you encode it into image features, and it's going to talk to the state by means of cross-attention. It updates the state, it writes to the state, and then it reads from the state. And then from the read state, you're going to have a predictor or readout function, headers, that outputs the point maps in the cameras. And so that you can throw it into the scene. A new image comes in. You do the same thing. You update the state. Its color is changing. You read it out. You throw it into the scene. And you repeat this multiple times in a recurrent way. Of course, it has to be also trained in a recurrent way. But this is some details, which I'm happy to discuss. But it's really just set of transformer attention stuff with like readout functions on this thing. Okay, and so if you are familiar with Duster, which is also another transformer-based approach, but Duster only takes in 2 images and outputs the point maps in the first image's coordinate frame. It's really kind of replacing that with a state. Okay, and this is kind of why I'm saying it's actually how you train and how you run this actually makes the world's difference between like static feed-forward prediction to something that can actually update its own beliefs. Another benefit, actually, that we did is that because of this particular choice, our 3D representation was latent. It's just a token. So if you actually wanted to know, like, oh, what does actually the part of the world look like here, you can easily query this, actually, by representing its camera into something called RayMap. And this is just a way to represent the SE3 representation in image coordinate frame. You send it to, you get the features. And then now you only read from the state. You don't write to the state because you don't have any new observations. But then you can actually get this prediction, and then you can see it, completed version of it in your point map. So that's another thing. This is kind of a, we're not really modeling this as a multimodal generative distribution, but you can ask for the parts of the scene that you haven't seen, and that's only because you have this prior. Okay. So, when you train this in a recurrent way, which is a bottleneck. It's hard to train these kind of things, but you can. And it's we mix up the images and the ray map sometimes. When you train with the ray map, you only do the readout, and then you train this against ground truth point clouds. So this part is same with Duster. And one of the big reason why this is more robust is because Chen Chen and Yifei did a really good job training on really, really big collection of data sets. And I think this is another lesson, which is that a lot of the successes that we are seeing right now is because the vision community collected so many, actually, data sets, synthetic and real, that over time it does accumulate and allows you to train these data-driven models. Of course, you would want to train this from video without any supervision, and I think that's a good challenge. But the nice thing about this online framework is there's actually no differentiation between static videos and dynamic videos, because you're just outputting the per frame point map in the first world coordinate frame. Nor does it actually see the difference between video and unstructured photo collections. I mean, you just look at the unstructured photo collection in some order. And of course, the ordering matters, but that's natural. Like, you go to your Airbnb listing and you look at it, and I mean, you gotta look at it multiple times, but it changes. The order actually can matter to insert, to perceive. And another nice thing about this approach is that it achieves task level scalability. It actually solves a lot of the 3D problems, like camera calibration, camera pose estimation, multi-view 3D video depth, and inferring new structures. And so here are some results on static videos. This is run online and in a streaming manner. And here are some challenging scenes with these very highly specular stuff that is also able to recover a pretty reasonable representations, point clouds. And then it also works on dynamic videos and image collections. Okay, so here are some examples of this inferring this new structure. So you can move around, and I will talk about this visualization later. But you can actually move to the scene and be like, I want to see the scene from this camera. And you can query it, and you can place it. And you can continually kind of add these new views to complete that part of the table out of your prior. Okay, so one exciting question is like, what is in the state that you actually ended up training? So this is actually what the state looks like when you don't give in anything. So you can kind of learn what these Duster-like models learn as a prior. It basically learns that the world is made up of walls and floors. And so that's why when you don't give any image, it gives you this kind of like pieces of walls. Okay, now I'm going to show you, so this is a video of Alyosha's office that I think I actually took with my iPhone. We're gonna send some of these frames in it and see how the state evolves. Okay, so as it sees more images, it immediately outputs that, oh, it's actually this room, and updates it. And so the gray parts are like unseen, and you can still ask for this. So that's kind of a neat visualization of what's happening in the neural network. I'm happy to take questions if you have. Yes?
Are you doing training online as well?
Yes, I am doing training as you go online, and that's very important because that's how it learns how to correct itself. Yeah, it's funny. I think it's kind of the training data. Like in the beginning, when we trained this, actually we've been trilling around with this scene. In the beginning, it actually kind of did this data, like actually blue dots outside, and I kind of like thought it was outside. But I think it's kind of data bias. And in the end, in this model, it's actually giving you this kind of flat things. Great. Yeah? We are using pre-trained Duster, but we're not using any type of like, I think, yes.
For the dynamic object, like fusion, like how do you tell if it's a new object that you just didn't see in the previous code view versus it's the same object that you saw previously? Because you have one demonstration.
Right, that's a very good question. And the way, technically this is, I think, is not exactly 40, because 40 to me means that you know exactly where this point goes. Instead, what this is doing is, it's like depth camera. Every single time you're throwing the points in the proper place. So you have it's like 3.5D. You only get the depth of the thing that you see. No correspondences, but I'm going to get to that. OK, great. All right, so there's really a lot more to do in this direction. And so if you kind of see, I think optimization-based methods don't get any results when you only have one or two few images. But as it gets more images, suddenly it gets much better. And I think we are still around this area, because we're doing this online feed forward, which does something like bundle adjustment or loop closure, but then it's still not exactly really there, because it's, And it's really interesting to think about how to bridge that gap. And I think that's quite close to things like reasoning that's happening right now, because you are learning to optimize. Maybe you can take explicit update steps, and you can manipulate this. And so really, the ideal path would be the red one above, and we're still not there. And I think there's actually a lot of interesting questions to ask in this domain. Handling long context is still a challenge. It's still feed forward and dependent on the data. The data set is not that long, or it's hard to get long data set. And you know why? It's because we train on output of COMAP or traditional optimization. And so we still need to make those work. This really kind of provides the data set. And because it has to be trained in a recurrent way, it suffers from the same issues about the recurrent neural network. It's not that batch parallel, so it's like slow. And so converting that into that kind of real transformer-like causal model would be a really interesting direction. Learning to optimize explicitly, like learning to take explicit optimization tracks would be really exciting. And lastly, it's not really doing the tracking in Fusion, but I'm going to get to this. But yes?
If you're training online, then don't you have pretty subtle issues about kind of overfitting to the narrow distribution that your one camera is seeing? Or have you thought about the lifelong sort of implications of that?
Yeah, so I think one answer is just train on lots and lots of data. But it is very dependent. And like how you subsample the data also matters. I think one nice lesson is that we actually do have reasonable amount of training data nowadays from the videos. The videos, some are synthetic, but some are from the internet videos, and they definitely help. But we definitely don't really do very long ones. So if you really walked a lot along, it will forget. And to loop close after many frames, you just have to scale and train a very long version of this, which might not be a satisfying answer. And I think that's really kind of leading to understanding this form. And maybe you can do a more explicit version, and that's kind of like a direction. OK, so that's kind of just summary, like, just run it in a stream. And I've just been saying this for a long time. Just train it on the streaming data. It's a nice idea, but it's actually hard to execute because it's inefficient. One idea is to use like tokens or KV cache as a state, but then it's very memory expensive. Images you need to compress them a lot. I think this is a similar challenge as video models. Long training data is sparse and hard to get. A lot of interesting questions. Like it's still predicting the points in some kind of absolute coordinate system. That's another really bad challenge, which is that if you walked a long way, if you walk 100 meters, then those points actually have to have 100 meters of units, which is not a very good thing to do in a neural network. You really want that to be somehow normalized or invariant to your local location. I think these are real challenges when you're trying to work on 3D, 4D foundation models. But I think the takeaway is that you really need to update your current beliefs. You need to do optimization. You need awareness of your past. To do some kind of reasoning, you need to know what you were thinking before. And the online streaming setup forces this type of continuous updating. And it's not just a matter of test time inference, actually. It makes a big difference in the way I think this is why It's like the difference between BERT and GPT. So ChatGPT feels so much like humans because you can actually interact with it and it will change. And I think this is the kind of lesson, the implication that like vision algorithm can have. I think that's kind of what I'm trying to say, which is that a model that can handle arbitrary sets of sequences is not necessarily able to model the world online in a sequential way. You have to actually train it to be able to take things in a sequential way to learn to do the optimization. Yeah, so I think this is an exciting direction that we want to look in further. And here is a little bit of a preview. Like this thing wasn't really doing tracking or correspondences because you were outputting the points per frame. But we have a new work that's coming to arXiv like this weekend or something like this, where the idea is to actually output the points in the past in the future time step. That way, basically, you actually get the correspondences. And so this is a new direction that allows you to actually also predict how the points are moving in this point map type of representation, which is actually quite nice and flexible. OK, and lastly, I do want to show the results on state-of-the-art 4D from team optimization, because optimization is still very good and works, and it's finicky. But here is a video of my baby. We have this result called shape of motion, where we're actually reconstructing like her point clouds and how she's moving in the scene. So this is like taking all the outputs that I showed and fusing it together. So fusion is another problem that you need to really solve. And this looks really, I think this is really the, I think one, you have to solve the optimization in order to get to the learning algorithm. So, well, it kind of comes hand in hand. And so you can actually see these interactive results. So if you look at this, you can actually look at it on your website, which is super cool. And I'm going to talk about that later. OK. So that's really the streaming perception side that we're really excited about. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk about all the other kind of things that we do. So learning how babies learn to doing what babies can do. So of course, other things that babies can do is to learn to act from visual observations. So this baby is watching this video, clearly understanding the 3D structure, what's happening in the video, and then imitating it. And so this is really the big idea of visual imitation learning. You really want to be able to do that. Of course, we tried this. And I think it's actually more like us imitating the baby in real life, but that's OK. So I've been working on this line of direction for a while by reconstructing humans and using that as the target to train your robot policy. And so what's really up? And this is a very useful tool for you or for robotics people, hopefully. So, so it's been like 2016 we started, or like we've been working on this for a long time. But last year we had this new update where this prediction is becoming more and more accurate. We also have a prediction. This is a feed-forward approach for hand poses. This is outputting the joint angles of these parametric body and hand models. Again, work on these type of gestures so that you can teach your robot how to, do these things. So without getting into the details, how these approaches work is that you take a bounding box. And within those bounding box, it outputs the relative rotation and the joint angles of these people. And that you can see on the other side. So, deformable objects like humans are hard, so we solve this problem. But in doing so, we drop the big process, big information, which is that everything is bounding box relative, which means you don't really know how far away these two bounding boxes are, nor do you actually know how fast or where you are in the world, and they're moving. And actually, these first order information of where you are, how you're moving, It's like the most important thing when you want to copy this over to your robots. And of course, also for social understanding too. I mean, you need to really understand how far away from each other. And this is because video is a combination of the scene motion and the camera motion. So let's look at this video, right? The person is clearly running in the scene, you know this. But if you actually think about it, the person is always in the center of this video. Okay, so like if you didn't know that the camera is moving, it's like as if this person is just like running in place. So if you don't model the rest of the context behind the images, like the camera and the floor, you're gonna get this solution which projects perfectly fine. You really need to model the camera motion, solve the SLAM actually problem in order to let the person run in the 3D world. And so this is what we did with Vicky. We took the state-of-the-art Droid SLAM outputs and used it to reconstruct. And I think that's very exciting because I always use this video as a motivation for why you should be doing 3D because you live in a world that is 3D and dynamic. And this approach really is getting there. Of course, this is slow. This is team optimization, okay? But it's exciting because now you can actually reason about contact. And if you notice, there is a tall person, short person, and a medium height person. This relationship is actually recovered. And we do this by using contact constraints. That your floor is on the contact. This means you have to perceive the floor, which is actually always not easy because the floor is not visible. We actually estimate the best floor that explains the people's motion. So basically, my point is, it's very important to place people in the world and incorporate the context that is the camera. So then how about the rest of the world? Like the environment and the points. So we took this idea and tried it on, of course, we're kind of cheating because you're using a multi-view image with known identities, but given this input, you can actually run Duster on each of these images and run HMR. And if you naively put them together, they don't really match because scaling factor actually has to be explained. And but if you actually do some optimization to align them, now you can get these nice output where people are in the proper context. Basically, this method is basically doing structure for motion with humans. And the human points actually help you get better cameras and better geometry because of this. So we are finally able to see this synthesis of really incorporating all of your context together. But the nice thing about this approach is that given this image, of course taken by 2 cameras, you have all these questions like, who jumped higher? Or is Tyler closer to me or David? But once you can actually place people in the world, you can actually answer these questions. And my students are really into Visor, which is this visualization toolbox that I'm going to explain later. But now you can actually place some ruler and actually measure the distance between them. And I think this is super cool. You can answer these things. OK, so as a bit of a preview, this is an ongoing work that we're hoping to submit to Coral. So given the video, we are now going to expand this video and then obtain a reconstruction like this with humans and the environment. There's a couple of cool videos on the internet of people going down the staircase like this. I don't know if you want to teach your robots to do this, but why not? From that kind of output, the goal is to train something in sim and ideally do it in the real world. But I think robotics is very hard. OK, so that is the state of perceiving humans. And I have more baby pictures. And baby does more. So baby just doesn't walk around or dance. Baby interacts with the world. And this picture I like in particular because she is trying to stab this strawberry with this lemon. And this lemon was quite actually a hard one. So then it kind of makes sense. I mean, it's incredible the kind of thing she looks learns from just watching us do it. Here's some example of me showing how to do it, and she does it. It took a while for her to be able to do this. Okay, so we want to get to objects and moving objects. And that's super hard, actually. We did moving humans by focusing on humans. But so now we're going to go into multi-view regime. And so we're going to do NeRF. But of course, NeRF is just meaningless reconstruction of these kind of cloudy particles. So first, we optimize clip representations in the NeRF when we do the optimization, which allowed us to do this kind of search in the 3D field. It's called, in language conditioned radiance fields. From this idea, we took the similar idea to group objects from videos by optimizing, using some features to learn a contrastive feature that allows you to group similar things in together. Now, I'm skipping a lot because of the time, but how you group is a very semantically task-dependent problem. Like, the keyboard can be a whole thing, or each key can be its own groups. So how do you really reconcile that? And our solution here was to use the scale to specify the kind of grouping size that we wanted. So here, this is why we're showing at a really coarse scale, you get the whole of this NeRF gun. But if you make the scale smaller, you get these smaller over-segmented parts. And that allows you to learn efficiently without, there's a contradiction because a part can be both a big thing and a small thing. And that resolves this. OK, but once you can actually extract an object, you have the NeRF or Gaussian splats for that. You can fit a very, very simple mesh. You throw it into your Blender and do a very, very simple real-to-sim. And so hopefully you can see where this could go, which is to use this as the simulation to train your robots. What we did was to go first for the visual imitation direction. So here's a video from Justin. So we want the robots to learn how to manipulate an object from watching how we do it. So we first scan. Robot can see the object. And then we show how to move the robot object, motion to the robot. So we do all of these reconstructions, get the parts using a method I talked about. Now you have the template. So this is like human reconstruction. Now you have the template. Except now it's not a kinematic. It's just SE3 on every single parts. But once you have the 4D reconstruction, you can plan the robot action that replicates the motion on the robot. So the key factor in enabling this is to do monocular 3D reconstruction. So even if given the scan, you have to reconstruct the moving parts from monocular video, which is really hard. But once you have it, you can do these type of experiments. And now this is not really following the human hand, but it's really only making sure that the objects follow the same motion, which means you can actually rotate this object, and you can still do it. This is team optimization. So basically, you're fitting this template to explain the input images. One nice thing about this representation is that it's not a kinematic tree. So you can actually take these moving things around, which is, I think, nice. It's kind of not an articulated model. It's just like movable object model, which happens a lot in the real world. And we solve trajectory optimization, kind of a classical way of doing the actual motion. And there's also lots of interesting question here. But yeah, because you're actually reproducing the motion on the object, you can kind of do it on this different type of initializations. OK, but this really makes the 3D reconstruction problem really easy. And it's really not, because it's very viewpoint dependent. 4D is still very, very hard. So if the video is very long and if your hand occludes these objects, this method can diverge. This is the frustration and the kind of brittleness of optimization. And so if you run it for a long time, it does diverge. And so we actually have a new work which kind of trains a feed-forward model to do this task in the loop. So you're kind of doing this predict and optimize, get that optimized result to retrain your feed-forward predictor, and kind of doing this self-improving loop so that it can be more robust. Okay, so that's going to be on archive soon. This is kind of like a hand-defined way of combining both the learning and the feed-forward, but similar ideas actually exist in the language domains. Okay, I'm doing lots of pictures, and I have more pictures to show you. Last but not least, my group is really, really into making tools and libraries that everybody can use. So you may have heard of Nerf Studio. Maybe some people have used Nerf Studio here. Gsplat is also our open source re-implementation of Gaussians, and I think a lot of people are using it probably. This is used in many places. Like if you go to Amazon View in 3D, this is actually running that code, which is pretty cool. I didn't even know. They just told me. OK, now I'm going to talk about Visor. Who here knows about Visor? OK, let's get exciting. OK, I heard that MIT actually has their own thing that's like Visor. So what is Visor? I think Visor is going to change your life. I think if you're using robotics, I think you should use Visor. What is Visor? Visor is a web-based 3D visualization. So it's really just two things: Python controllable 3D viewport and a configurable 2D GUI. And it's very simple, but it's super powerful, because when you're working on 3D, you have to be able to visualize it. And so, for example, the whole Nerf Studio viewer was built in Visor, and you can super easily interact with it. Like the LURF paper, you can actually type in, show me a bulldozer, and interact with your models immediately through this GUI. And it's not just for radiance fields. It works for dynamic point clouds or meshes. And you can click around. My group implements lots of front-end exciting things, like how can you grab the point or draw a plot and plot. But I think it's going to be really exciting, because now we're expanding this to robotics application. So here is an example of Visor used to solve IK. You can move the hand, and it solves IK. You can change all the hyperparameters of that. Here are some examples from Isaac Gym. This is playing back rollouts from policies trained in RL. Here's another one in Isaac Gym, another policy rollout. And this is Mujoko. And so running 400 policies. And so this is really nice. This plot and plot is really important. If you're training an RL algorithm, it's very difficult to visualize this. Or it makes it so easy to see everything that you want. It can also do not more than just sim or offline data. You can actually also stream. So this is like running a joystick and controlling the robot. But then we visualize the state estimation that's coming from the robot internal sensors here. And so you're actually seeing it, mapping the outputs together. And this can be used to export all of these, a lot of the results that we have online. You can go to the website and actually interact with it, actually get to look at it. And that's really innovation of two things, which is that Gaussians are really light and you can actually do this. But Visor really allows this interface. And so it's really good to show your results. And Visor generates shareable links. So you can do this, and it's hosted on some of your computer. And you can just look at your results anywhere. And here's Justin when we first made it work on Nerf Studio on his way to Paris in the airplane. So now you can work on your results, and then you can generate your shareable links and send it to your advisor. And your advisor can look at it and move around it. Instant feedback. And that's really, it's really important. It's really powerful. OK, lastly, I have a bit of a preview for another toolkit that one of my students, Changmin and Brent, led to and implemented. And this is really kind of like making team optimization, unifying optimization, all things optimization for robot kinematics. And that is CPU, GPU, TPU accessible. This is basically like PyTorch. You can set up any objectives that are related to robot kinematics, and it will implement the autodiff for you, but with the second order solver doing proper least space algebra to do the rotations and everything. You can do this across all kinds of robot hardware. This is also using Visor to visualize it. You can set up some kind of cost, and you can do it on all kinds of different robots, or do planning, do trajectory optimization. The thing is, all of these problems are actually sharing basically similar objectives. So you can use this particular library to also do human body retargeting, and kind of generate these kind of retargeted results. And so this is really coming soon, like next week. So, okay, all right. So I think this is my last baby picture. So really the next step, really the biggest thing about her is that she's an embodied agent. And so that's really the direction that we are all excited about. I think all the tools that we're going to build are really relevant. And so in closing, yeah, I think as I showed lots of advances in reconstructing 4D from passive video by combination of feed-forward and optimization. That's like kind of the state. And I really think for this to be scalable, we need an online streaming perception models that can really close the gap between action and perception. And yeah, I think data is very important. And there's two kinds of data, I think. The video, which is vast on the internet, and the active data, which you're going to capture as you interact with the world. And I think the second point is towards active, because you can think about a Cuter-like model that actually outputs action and then integrates the new observation to plan what it should do next in a learning framework. And you have all the videos that we're going to reconstruct so that you can use it as a guidance. OK, so I really want to thank my group and collaborators. I really have wonderful group members that really, really works hard, and we have a lot of fun together. And without this group, all the things that I am thinking about came out of lots and lots of conversations with my group members. So I would like to thank them and take any questions. Thank you.
Wow, really fantastic talk. I'm going to run around with the microphone so that we can have the questions on the recording as well. So if any of you have a question, I'm going to come and give you the microphone.
I'm thinking about if you use Duster for like online training, how is it different from just distilling the knowledge from Duster to the model?
So that there's a big difference actually in training the model in an online way, because if it's not trained in an online way, it does not know how to update its state. Right? That's kind of what I'm trying to say actually. How you train the model makes a big difference in the capabilities that it can have. Does that make sense? Like if you only train, Duster is just a batch thing. You take 2 images, outputs it, and that's it. You can never ever change anything. Right? And then in order to do that, it actually does explicit optimization. But you kind of want to do learned optimization, learning-based optimization. In order to do that, you have to train it in an online way. In order to train it in an online way, you have to change the architecture so that it can train in an online way.
I see. And I think a trivial baseline for that is like, you mentioned optimization-based method can generate better results for long video. And why not just use like optimization-based method to get to the ground truth, like sort of ground truth, and so the learning-based method can at least generate aspects as result for long video.
Well, that's actually basically how all of these approaches are trained. We collect lots of videos, run column up, or this next shape of motion thing that we do. Now you can use that as a training data. So that is essentially that's what's happening. But then I think sometimes vision people, or like we are really focused on the problem of 3D reconstruction. We just really want to get the good 3D reconstruction. Then you go all the way on the right side. But then you kind of have to remember why you were trying to do this to begin with. And the reason why you're trying to do this to begin with is so that you can actually build something that can actually learn about the world like people can. And for that, you need this ability to update your hypothesis as the data comes in.
Thank you.
I'm going to come all the way around.
So there was, I guess, like, how well do these methods work on data sets like Epic, I guess, Ego4D, Epic Kitchens, where you don't get the 3D camera? I think there was a paper called Epic Fields where they tried to get the 3D camera information, but they didn't have the metric scale. And I'm not sure that the Colmap style methods work that well when it's dynamic. So I'm just curious how you overcame this challenge for dynamic videos. Like, how do you get the camera poses when it's dynamic and there's a lot of things moving around?
Yeah, I didn't really cover the state-of-the-art approaches in doing this, but quick answer is like DroidSlam-like methods basically ignore the dynamic parts. There's like mostly lots of static things in the world that you can use to kind of guide your cameras. And then you also have to infer their depth, but that's kind of like monocular depth priors. And approaches like shape of motion really kind of integrates all of these observations into one optimization to make sense of all of it. And so even if the off-the-shelf predictions are noisy, through the optimization process and some kind of low-dimensional like basis assumptions, you can put priors so that the trajectories will be smooth, and you can kind of get these things out of it. Yeah.
More questions? Yes.
This is very exciting work, and thank you for the great talk. I'm curious if you could share a bit about what you think the path might look like to, over the long term, to get towards architectures that are more similar to the human mind in the way that they can flexibly learn new types of representations, for instance, not only of human poses, but of all sorts of different types of objects. And I'm also curious if you can comment on how the resolution of these coherent representations over time play into that. We don't perfectly remember what we see when we turn around.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you have thoughts on the right way to formulate those problems in computer vision.
Yeah. So this is why I like to answer your second part of the question, which is like, what is the right representation? I think that's one nice thing about Qt, which was that we put everything in this state, which is just a set of tokens. And so it's very flexible in that way. Like if you wanted low resolution stuff because that's kind of what you need for your particular task, you can. And especially if you're reading out actions, which we don't right now, but if you could imagine that if you did, then it would learn on its own, like the right representation would emerge. Yes, but then this representation should have some kind of, I do believe that it should have some kind of spatial temporal ideas about the world, which we're also kind of doing by querying this state with cameras, which imbues some kind of spatial temporal meaning to this. There's, a lot of different ways of doing this, and I think that's interesting. And I forget what your first part of the question is.
You may have already touched on it there. In some of the demonstrations you were showing, for example, there were human pose models.
Right.
And it's clear that sort of putting in structural assumptions like human pose models, the notion that objects decompose into parts gives you a lot of power.
Right.
Humans seem to have so many different types of structural models like this that we know how to use.
Right.
I'm curious how you think about what the arc of computer vision may be to achieve that type of flexibility.
Yeah, so I think I'm showing the two extremes, right? This is the reconstruct everything with correspondence in 4D. If you can do this, that's really flexible because it doesn't matter what it is. It's not category-specific prior. It can reuse all kinds of priors. This is kind of the direction of large-scale things. And I think this is optimization. I think we always go back and forth. Once you can do the optimization, you can do the feed forward. And that's kind of really where this preview work is trying to get at, because you're trying to be able to predict this in one representation. But I think it's kind of about how you want to use this. I think, for me, I think of the human body model as basically like a communication tool. Like suppose your thing can do this. Your video models trained so well from all the videos, you can read this out. But then you're not gonna use this whole set of points to do your robot stuff. You need some low-dimensional explainable representation. So I think of the human body stuff particularly because humans are very important subjects as like a YAML or like a JSON format to describe what's actually happening. And in that sense, I think it will be really useful. And eventually, I think these approaches are going to merge, and it will be more scalable in that like a single model can get this, also the humans in actions. I think that would be really nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Okay, yeah, gonna come to you.
Thank you so much for the talk. It was like super interesting. One question I had was regarding like the parts decomposing, and in particular, like the ability to recover the kind of geometric constraint correlated with some of these parts. I was wondering if you could kind of expand a little bit on how exactly you model those like geometric relationships. Is it just kind of by like,
Oh yeah.
is there a way to infer like other potential like geometric motions as well from an object after demonstrating one motion, or is it like you just kind of like try to recover that sort of relationship and make the robot be able to produce that?
Yeah, so this one actually is just a pure SE3 from one of the center parts. So that's why it's like super flexible. It's not even assuming a kinematic tree. Like to set a kinematic tree, you need an a priori knowledge of how this thing articulates. But maybe it's not even stuck together, you know? So then you can remove these things. And so that's why it's very flexible, and you can convert it in any way you want later.
Very cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool. Let's thank Angju one more time for this fantastic talk.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for coming. I think Angju is going to stick around for like another half an hour. I think that's the plan, right? Around here. if you have
You're
questions.
right, actually.
Thanks everyone for coming.